also. He'd been to Ceylon, Sri Lanka previously, and had not had a particularly pleasant exchange with the ruler at the time on his first voyage, and had left in something of a hurry. But he was now returning on his third voyage, bringing this object that you can see on your screen with him. This object is in Colombo. It's in the museum. I haven't. The image on the right shows it in the museum in Colombo. It wasn't discovered until 1911. Astonishingly, it was found used as a cover for a drain, and it was originally standing in one of those two temples that you saw illustrated in Zheng's map on the previous screen. A temple that had been visited by Ibn Battuta in the previous century. He'd been to Sri Lanka too. I remember I said that Zheng didn't discover anything. Ibn Battuta had been to all these places previously. Well, Sri Lanka is a good example of that. Somebody else who got there were the Portuguese, who in fact destroyed the temple in question, and it's presumably when at that moment of destruction that this stele became lost. But you can also see there are various reasons why it might not have been a particularly treasured item in Sri Lanka, and we'll see why in a second. But first of all, just to emphasize what an extraordinary object this is, it's a Tamil, Persian, Chinese trilingual inscription. How many of those are there from the 15th century? I think this is probably the only one. And it's more or less intact. The Persian is largely effaced, very, very difficult to read, apparently. They thought it must be an Arabic script, because it was originally thought to be Arabic. But the Chinese is entirely legible. And this is what it says. Sorry, we do have to read it, because it makes good reading. His Majesty, the Emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty, has dispatched the eunuchs, Zheng He, Wang Jinghong, and others, to set forth his utterances before Lord Buddha. So not before the Sri Lankans, but to bring this, to make a Buddhist pilgrimage to this temple, bringing this stone stele with them. Deeply do we revere you, merciful and honored one, that's the Buddha, whose bright perfection is wide-embracing and whose way of virtue passes all understanding. The mountainous isle of Sri Lanka lies in the south of the ocean, and its Buddhist temples are sanctuaries of your gospel, where your miraculous responsive power imbues and enlightens. So flattering words targeted at the Buddha. And then we get down to business. Of late, we've dispatched missions to announce our mandates to foreign nations. And during their journey over the ocean, they've been favored with the blessing of your beneficent protection. An interesting aspect of the Voyages is how, promiscuous they were in their religion. We've said that Zheng He was at least born a Muslim. His father had been on the Hajj, was definitely grown up a Muslim. We assume that he was too. And yet here we have him bringing a Buddhist stele for strategic reasons, because Sri Lanka was a Buddhist state, or rather the location of Buddhist states, and that's why they're bringing a Buddhist object with them. So, of late, we've dispatched missions to announce our mandates to foreign nations, and during their journey over the ocean, they've been favored with the blessings of your beneficent protection. They've escaped disaster and misfortune and journeyed in safety to and fro. In everlasting recognition of your supreme virtue, we therefore bestow offerings in recompense. So they've come to Sri Lanka with this object and with offerings of the kind that you'd want to give if you were endowing a very, very important Buddhist temple. 1,000 bars of gold, incense, silk hangings, incense burners, objects of that kind. And they brought all this to deliver to the temple, presumably with the intention of currying favor with the local patrons of the temple. That would make sense. But this text is not addressed to those local patrons, it's addressed to the Buddha. So, to say thank you for the safe voyage. May his light shine upon the donors. Now, the donors are the Chinese, right? The donors are the Ming expedition. So, asking for thanks when they get to Sri Lanka, or rather asking for protection from the Buddha when they arrive in Sri Lanka. And this was in the 7th year of Yongle, 1410. So this is the third of the expeditions. And what happened? Well, we can go back to our other stele, back in Fujian, to find out what the outcome of this event was. Third voyage. In the 7th year of Yongle, 1409, so that's the year before they arrive in Sri Lanka, commanding the fleet, we went to the countries visited before and took our route by the country of Xilan, right, that's Ceylon. Its king, Alagak Konara, was guilty of a gross lack of respect and plotted against the fleet. The plot was discovered, And thereupon that king was captured alive. In the 9th year, 1411, on our return, he was presented to the emperor. So he's kidnapped. The king is, there's a battle, the city's destroyed, the king is put on one of these ships and taken off back to China. On our return, he was presented to the emperor as a prisoner. Subsequently, he received the imperial favor of returning to his own country. So the emperor is gracious about it and sends him back on a subsequent trip. The Sri Lankan version of events, as you might imagine, is not quite the same. Now, my grasp of Sri Lankan sources is not strong, so I'm reliant on whatever source I used for this particular translation. But it makes sense. During the reign of King Alagakonara, Dos Raja, I don't know why the Emperor of China is being called Dos Raja, but anyway, the Raja presumably is King Dos. I don't know what that means. Maybe somebody who, with the linguistic skills, would be able to tell me what that means. Anyway, he's the King of Great China, the Ming Emperor. No, he's not. Sorry. He landed in Lanka, so this presumably is Zheng. Dos Raja, King of Great China, landed in Lanka, in Ceylon, with an immense army, and under pretext of bringing presents and curiosities, craftily carried away King Alagakonara, so that's the same name, who fell into his hands, foolishly thinking that he also brought presents, as other foreign princes had previously. Right? So thinking that these guys are showing up with gifts, then gets kidnapped and taken away. His 4 younger brothers were killed. Taking many captives, Dos Raja returned to Great China. So yeah, an interesting point that I slipped up there. Dos Raja is, they're calling him the King of China and claiming that he actually arrived, that this presumably is Zheng, or one of the other leaders of this expedition that brought the steles. I think you're beginning to get quite a good sense. This is partly a debunking exercise. We've already tried to take on Gavin Menzies. But he's not the only one who occasionally presents a less than fully accurate account of these events. For example, the title of that book leaves something to be desired. Given what we've just understood, this is a book that was again published during the Zheng fever around the 600th anniversary of the first expedition, peace missions on a grand scale. Well, that trip to Sri Lanka was not a peace mission. Our journey continues. Guli that's a difficult one. Calicut on the west coast of India. Hulumos, the Persian Gulf, the Hormuz, right? Hormuz. Now Hormuz is actually the end of the scroll. If you keep going with the scroll, it's the last woodblock print. It's the point you get to when you finally unroll the scroll. And the interesting thing that happens is that you then start moving back along the scroll in order to get down the east coast of Africa. Again, we've got this rubber sheet topology going on with scales and orientations and even doubling back on oneself, all being represented in this very, very long linear format. So as we move down the east coast of Africa now, we're actually moving back towards the beginning of the scroll. Does that make sense? It might make sense with the next slide. Anyway, two more locations. Mogadishu. Mogadishu, exactly. It's still there. It's off in Somalia. And the last one is Malindi. Now, I don't know what that matches up with, but that's the last point on the African coast, as recorded by this map. As recorded by this map preserved in the 17th century encyclopedia. There's our map. Actually, that's the same image as the one we saw previously. Sri Lanka with the Buddhist temples, right? The 2 Buddhist temples on either end of the island, and just across that small expanse of water, the east coast of Africa. So what's happened here? But there is a logic to it. This is not an irrational map. This is a very, very clever map. That the lines at the top are the routes going outwards. And when you get to Hormuz, you double round on that scroll and come back in order to move down the east coast of Africa. It's not in any sense a misrepresentation of where they were. It's actually a very, very clever way of representing the surface of a sphere, after all, in a linear format. What have we got here? Oh yes, navigate. You've noticed there's text along the lines. Remember, these dotted lines are the paths taken by these ships. This is a record of the routes they followed, and you can see there's text following some of those. Those are descriptions of how to navigate the route. They begin. I'm wondering whether any of these are actually large enough for me to read, but they begin with a destination. They then tell you how long you have to keep on that course. So they begin with a destination, and it's followed by a compass point. Now, the Chinese compass is divided up into 24 15-degree divisions. So by specifying any one of those symbols that you can see arrayed around that circle, around that compass circle, you can specify any of those 24 divisions. Or you can specify two adjacent ones together, which means halfway in between the two. And that's what these maps are doing. That's what that text is saying. It's recording the orientation of the compass needle when you're following that particular path. It also records distance in terms of the passage of time. So if you're following a route, it records the amount of time it takes to travel that distance. It also records, and this is fascinating, it records the altitude of stars using, and this is a reconstruction by a modern Chinese scholar, but using a set of these wooden plates. You hold a plate of the right size at arm's length, with the bottom of the square on the horizon, and so that the top of the square aligns with the star in question. And that gives you a measure, because depending on the size of plate you choose, a measure of the angular altitude of that star, which you can use to answer latitude questions. If you want to know where you are in terms of latitude, you can use this scheme. And that's what all that text is that you can see scribbled along those lines, those dotted lines on the map.